So great. All right. Well, we'll start off. I just want to mention right off the bat that we're recording this talk, and also by just welcoming everyone. Thank you so much for all the panelists for coming. I'm so excited for this conversation. I think it's going to be really wonderful. So a few technical things is at a point after the panelists speak, we're going to have the opportunity for people to bring questions to the panelists. So you can raise your hand at that point, and we'll bring you up on the stage, and we'll have the panelists answer your questions. Otherwise, we'll just keep this real casual. Clubhouse seems to be more of a low-key, casual kind of thing. So we'll just stay on topic and be ourselves and talk about how our art practices and how they were related to the emotional impact of the pandemic. And I have a few specific questions for the panelists in that vein. So if you're in the room, do go ahead and ping anybody any connections that you feel would be interested in our topic. And I'll start off by introducing the panel. This is an awesome panel. I'm super excited about all the people here. Lorna Collins is an artist, writer, and research fellow at University College London. Her active research in arts and health began from her PhD, where she was a triple scholar at Jesus College, Cambridge University. When she was 18, Lorna had a severe traumatic brain injury and fell into a coma. After awaking with total amnesia, Lorna developed a number of psychiatric illnesses and was locked away for nearly 2 decades. During this time, art was her savior, her medicine. Lorna has done a TED Talk called How Creativity Revived Me about her story. She is currently writing and illustrating a book of short stories for children. You can see more of Lorna's stuff at her Instagram account, Sensing Lorna, or lornacollins.com. And then we have Derek Pyle, who has lived experience of voices and visions. Derek is a member of Madness Network News, a collective project focused on psychiatric abolition and mad liberation. As the director of Waywards and Mean Signs, Derek works with artists and musicians from around the world creating musical adaptations of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. In his role as program manager for Vision Quilt, Derek facilitated art workshops for communities impacted by gun violence. He is working on a book of creative nonfiction. Phoebe Sparrow Wagner is an artist and the author of 3 books, written under a different name. A graduate of Brown University in 1975, she attended medical school for 2 years before becoming ensnared by the mental illness system. Diagnosed and hospitalized multiple times over 40 years, restrained, secluded, and electroshocked against her will, she has spent 15 years of her adult life in psychiatric institutions and knows firsthand how easily such treatment becomes torture. Her art has several foci, but one of these is to depict psychiatric treatments such as restraints and seclusion, as well as her inner experience of altered states. Her art website is artfoley365.com, and her blog about art and schizophrenia and everything else can be found at phoebesparrowwagner.com. All right, so let's start off with the first real question that we were asking the panelists was really how did COVID help cope with the emotional impact of the pandemic, or not. We have several varied experiences here today. So we'll start off with Lorna. Lorna, can you talk a little bit about that experience for you?
Yeah, sure. I think that the pandemic, in a way, has been almost like a tonic for my creativity. That might sound weird or unusual, but I've been stuck at home in lockdown, and I've been burying myself away in my imagination. I hallucinate and produce bizarre, absurd visions. So sometimes I have weird animals or insects journeying through outer space inside my head, and these strange things appear to me. And what I do is I paint and I write. And this process and the visions have been exacerbated during the pandemic. I've had much more hallucinations than before, because I've had more time to myself on my own. But in a way, I'm actually grateful, because the pandemic has allowed me to be prolifically creative. Sometimes my visions are really scary and very violent, but when I paint them or write them down, the violence recedes and what's left is pure expression. It's no longer scary, it's illustrative and forever interesting. So I become interested in my visions, not scared of them. Also, during all the different periods of lockdown, I've been running art workshops called Being Creative, and a number of different participants from all walks of life have entered and engaged with creativity during my workshops. And we share a creative space. And there is that beautiful connected silence of concentrated art making. So the only sounds you hear are a pencil scraping a piece of paper or a splash of a wet paintbrush. And we have pure liberated imagination. And these sessions have been incredibly therapeutic and connected for all sorts of different participants, be they people who suffer from mental distress or not. It doesn't make much difference, because we all have creativity, and when we make art together in a group, we can share our creativity and make it even bigger and more powerful. And I think that art making in a group, even if it's virtual, can really help us cope with the emotional impact of the pandemic. I've been really surprised at how well it has worked to have a workshop done on Zoom, for example. I've never used Zoom before, and it's easy and it works so well. So that was a surprise for me. I don't know if anyone else felt that.
That Zoom was actually kind of intuitive, yeah,
Yeah.
and helpful. I found that as well, and I also feel like being on Zoom. Uh, I prefer it now to phone
Yes.
calls. Yeah, yeah. That was really, um, I empathize and really identified with a lot of things that you said there, Lorna. Um, and I'm sure we can. I'm sure we all can sort of empathize with a lot of that. And Phoebe, would you like to add anything? You just need to unmute yourself.
Add in what way? Do you mean my statement or?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead and let's talk about your experience.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me say that I'm an introvert, and I'm probably more a loner than not a loner.
Mm.
And I say this because things like lockdowns, or what the French, which is my another passion of mine, call confinement or confinement, they don't really bother me at all.
Mm.
In fact, I may have felt the most normal I ever felt during the long months of lockdown and even of semi lockdown. What was an aberration for most, spending long days and nights alone or with a small group of family or the same people, is really my norm. So I have to admit that during the abnormal situation of a pandemic and lockdown, I thrived. For once, no one could tell me to socialize more, to see other people, or scold me for spending so much time alone. Like I said, in these deeply abnormal times, my norm was the norm for once. So I felt rather normal. That said, art making became ever more important to me as the weeks of pandemic isolation became months, became a year, and now more than a year. Even I need to see my friends from time to time. But I live for art, and making art gives me a reason to live, which is something I need. So I made art all the time in order to live and to communicate with others that I could no longer see in person, and to save myself from despair, the despair that results whenever I don't or can't create.
Yeah, I heard that a lot, Phoebe, about people who are more introverted, feeling like this was a more comfortable thing for them, the norm. Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually I was it was great for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I had the opposite experience where I'm very extroverted, so it was terrible. I felt so isolated. But yeah, I have a very introverted friend and a few introverted friends who said similar things.
Yeah.
But yeah. So Derek, can you want to add something?
Sure, yeah, yeah, Lorna and Phoebe, I really appreciate your hearing your own processes. So for me, I'd say I had some of the opposite experience, but I haven't been at the beginning of the couple months before the pandemic. I was working on this creative nonfiction book and really feeling good about it, and really like, yeah, this is really coming along. And then sort of it's all stopped since the pandemic started. But I think part of what happened for me um, in previous years, I'd been in and out of the States and Ireland doing a large project in these creative adaptations of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake and working with artists and musicians. And so a lot of that was sort of bringing different artists together and helping put on events and, writing press releases and all that kind of stuff that can go into creating art as well. And when the pandemic hit, I found that same sort of skill set was really useful in my local community around some of the sort of crises that were emerging around the pandemic. And in particular, I started working a lot with unhoused folks and that community here. And um, so, so I've sort of had this in watching some of the social crises that have happened during the pandemic. I've really felt quite anxious, I think, and sort of driven to be responding to, here in Oregon, where I am in Southern Oregon. The police are getting ready to evict everyone from where they live, and they're in camps along in the sort of greenway here, which is the nature area. Um, and that's a real crisis, to have people's homes destroyed. People have been told they could shelter in place there throughout the pandemic, and now next week the police will come with bulldozers and destroy everyone's home. um, so we did create an art installation around that just the other day. Actually, some friends that live out on the greenway said, we want to do this art installation, and a couple of us went out and put up all these signs, sort of, protesting these planned evictions. And so I've been able to find things like that, but the kind of, for me, the I need a lot of spaciousness in order to really create art that I feel good about. And sort of, despite most of the world being on lockdown, my life has not felt spacious at all in the last
Mm.
um, year and a half. And it's interesting too, because I've actually had this experience a couple times of working on this particular uh, creative nonfiction book, which is essentially my own story and includes, my experiences with voices and visions and mental health system and all these kinds of things. And I found that I procrastinate that by getting involved in these kind of community organizing projects. Is like, there seems to be some creative impulse that's also related to this pulse for collective liberation, or whatever you want to call this, and so it's been a really fruitful detour and distraction. I wouldn't take it back at all, but it hasn't been the great book that I envision, writing, or that I imagine other folks have been able to get through um, in these times. So I'm a bit of I tried to um, talk Karin out of having me on here. I said, I don't know if I'm the contrarian here, but this has been my experiences. It's just been the opposite for me, but again, very fruitful, and I wouldn't do it differently. But and I mean, um, it's really ended my back and forth between Ireland and the sort of creative life and work I was doing there just hasn't been possible. So in a way, it sort of closed a chapter of my creative life. So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I did try to talk. You did try to talk me out of it, but I think it's so important. That all the different perspectives are honored here because I've heard from many people that whether it's the anxiety or like you're saying, like your life was not, your life wasn't spacious, and spaciousness was kind of how you engage with creativity. Everyone had a very different experience, and a lot of people I spoke with were saying, no, my creativity went out the window. Like I was too busy being anxious, or I was too busy feeling isolated or sad. Um, so I thought it was very important to have you here, Derek, as somebody who could offer a different perspective here of that experience.
I'd be interested, Derek, to hear your views on writing creative nonfiction and publishing in general, because I've written several books and hardly any of them get anywhere near a publisher. Firstly, my memoir, no one's interested in, because apparently at the moment everyone in pandemic is writing a memoir or a story about themselves. Apparently that's the really common thing to do in lockdown. So what's your approach to publishing?
Well, we
Derek?
can certainly talk about that. Separately. I can connect you with Derek as far as that. I just want to keep on topic as far as creativity and COVID, and I really agree with you there that it's very hard. I'm also trying to. It's funny you say that everyone is, and I'm also trying to publish a memoir as well. But I just want to stay on topic. I'll definitely connect you with Derek afterwards about publishing. But another thing I took from something that Derek was saying was sort of the idea of spaciousness and creativity, and we're sort of expanding the discussion a little bit here, but spacious. If having to feel spaciousness in order to engage in creativity is such a common thing, because the constraints of stress and anxiety and things like that just kind of like drain it from you, and I wonder, for some people, the COVID created that space if they were safe, you know, and does engaging in art making actually create that spaciousness if you can find it, that is healing and is helpful for that sort of anxiety or stress or restraint that we felt. Um, I just feel like, for me personally, I found spaciousness somehow, and actually engaged in creativity in a way I never had before in my entire life. So, even though I've been an artist my whole life, the space that the pandemic created, for me was super fruitful. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
I think for me, my experiences open infinite space, because I can see and hear so many things. And when I make an artwork, whether it's visual or written or film, it puts up boundaries, and it makes my space that's infinite more tangible. So in a way, it's closing it so that I can cope with it better.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely. So, do you feel it's sort of putting boundaries around it so that it's more manageable?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because, imagination and things can, like you said in the beginning, our visions and voices and things like that can bleed into scary places.
Overwhelming.
Yeah, overwhelming and scary. So that's interesting as an artist, sort of like a something that creates boundaries that help to sort of scaffold our minds, as we're creating. That's really interesting. Phoebe, I see you being really quiet. Do you have anything to add on that?
I make art every day of my life because I have to. The talk of spaciousness and limits makes sense to me. Um, but even in my living room, which is where I make my art, that's spacious, a space enough for me, and it is also imposes limits that also help me to decide what to do or what to make.
Hmm.
Um, but the problem for me has never been what to do or when to do it or how to do it. It's just simply, will it get out the front door? Is it too big to get out the front door?
Yeah, too big to. You mean the front? When you say front door, what do you mean? Like the actual
Well, I
front?
mean, if you build a boat, you better not build it in the basement.
Oh, I see. Right, right.
So
Yeah, yeah.
I've made paper mache sculptures that I couldn't get out the front door. So the space I live in limits really the size of my work,
Yeah,
but
that
it
makes
doesn't
sense.
limit anything else.
Yeah, yeah. It's so fascinating how each of us sort of engage with art making and differently. You know, and in some ways, in a lot of the conversations that I had over COVID about art making was, you know, and before COVID, is that we are artists and we make art because we have to, right? Um, and that's I think too a question I'll ask really quick, and then we'll move on to if anybody has any questions, we can move on to that too, and then we'll move on to the second part of the talk, which is about how as a society art making can help us move forward from the trauma of the pandemic. Um, but So actually, let's just go into that. I know there are very few people here, but does anybody have anything they want to say? I can bring them up if they want to raise their hand. If not, totally okay. And if not, we'll move on to the second part of this conversation, which I'm really excited about because I have a very strong feeling that art making and Derek, I loved what you said also about the art making in context with protest. I'm very into that as well, and feel that art making has a role in society that is very profound and important, and sometimes undervalued as well as artists are undervalued in our society. I think too, and I don't think it's any different in Europe, Lorna. I think I mean I've heard some things about more programs for artists in Europe and the UK and stuff, but as far as America is concerned, artists are sort of undervalued. But so what I would the question I wanted to ask everybody is really, this has been such a trauma for a lot of us in big and small ways. Some of us that have had really losses as far as our loved ones, as well as jobs and purpose and certainty, any kind of feeling of solid groundedness. So I feel there is a huge trauma that's happened, a collective worldwide trauma, and I am of the opinion that art is always there for us as something that can transform trauma. And I wonder how each of you, and we'll start with Derek, how you feel art making can help us come through the trauma of this pandemic a better people, as a globe, as a world.
That's a really good question. I think I find it a bit hard to think about the world these days. I mean, it's always been a big place, but I think in a way COVID has localized me so much. It's hard for me to, of course, I see things in the news, but it's hard to sort of even keep up with some of my friends in different towns. I don't know. There's something hard about not being able to travel or go see people or these kinds of things that keeps my consciousness stuck in here in little Southern Oregon. But I do think one of the one of the exciting things that I think has really happened during the pandemic, and certainly relates to art and our, particular communities that, of Mad in America and psychiatric survivors and everything, is Madness Network News making a revival in volume 9, the first issue of Madness Network News since I think 1983 coming out. And I think Phoebe, your art will be on the cover. And maybe that's something that only Vesper Moore and others have been working on, reviving Madness Network News for a long time. But maybe in a way the pandemic and everyone getting used to Zoom so much has made this kind of different collaboration possible, where it's totally normal to work on a newsletter like that with, I've worked with Vesper a bit on it. I'm here in Oregon and they're in Massachusetts. And so I'll be really excited to see how in our movement there's kind of this, I think, a revival that's happening, and it can fits in with the uprising for Black lives and people rethinking what mental health is and all of these kinds of things. And so it's quite exciting to think of a a, a place or a space where conversation, and very much including art, can emerge and be collected. And of course, there's space like Mad in America is a space where there's a lot of conversation, but I think to have something you can hold in your hands, and or have digital subscription or whatever, but a newsletter or something that comes together is quite exciting, and I think does really tie into healing and the conversations we can have within our community and with other communities that are also sort of arriving at, like, the way police abolitionists are also arriving at, or do arrive at these questions around wellness checks and crisis and police shootings, and what are the conversations we can have together. I think that's quite exciting. So I look forward to that and whatever comes through that.
Yeah, definitely having the ability to collaborate across boundaries is so much more real to us now, and to create artwork that you can, like you said, the physical thing in your hand. I love that. So we have someone who, Damini Celebre. I'm not sure if I am pronouncing your name right, but let's bring you up on stage. You have a question for the panelists? You're unmuted.
Hi, I'm Damini Celebrate, and I don't necessarily have a question, but I wanted to share a little bit of my experience over the past year. I'm also an artist and a healer, and at the beginning of COVID, and I would do workshops in the States and such, combining creativity and healing. And when COVID happened, I started offering these free events called Express Yourself, and they were more embodied creative practices, a lot of painting, a lot of drawing, a lot of movement, to allow people to connect in with what they were feeling. I think we all got so numb, shock, fear, all of that kicked in. It started numbing us out. And I'm also a Chinese medicine practitioner, so there's a lot of conversation about flow and energy and feeling what you feel so you don't get ill. And that actually ended up being really a profound experience for myself as the space holder and for the people in it, because it gave them a sense of freedom and expression that, at that time, nobody can really, everybody was bumping around trying to figure out how to have some space to express oneself, emotionally or creatively. And it's been an interesting dance of how to hold, just how to hold space for people to come within. So that was kind of like, that's kind of like my external experience. Internally, as an art maker, I found that I was so distracted. Yes, I got busy trying to figure out how to make a living, but just there wasn't enough space, even though we had all this space to make a lot of art. And I was listening to Derek and how he was talking about space, and it's an interesting dance to find enough space inside oneself. Because as soon as in the States, we went into lockdown, I'm like, oh my God, I have 2 weeks to make art. And all I did was fret.
Yeah.
But, and so there's these interesting dances of how we've been affected by COVID. So, in one way, there's this opportunity to share what we do, like we're all doing in different ways. But anyway, I just wanted to share that, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I resonated with a lot of what you said, and the idea of in the beginning, finding that space and what do you do with it, right? And then being kind of surprised somehow how you end up using it, and then also, the idea of transforming and moving energies through the art making process. I wonder, if that's something, the Eastern medicine and things like that understands that the act of creation and the act of expression actually does move sort of trauma and energy through you. If you want to say, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like, if we're energetic beings and anything gets stuck, either a bad, food stuck in your belly or an emotion stuck in your belly, in Chinese medicine, it's all the same. It's just about something being stuck and how do you move it.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much. And it's pronounced Damini?
Damini, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, and Dao would also like to say something, so let me get her up here, and then we'll come back to the final question after that, with Phoebe and Lorna. So hold on one second. Let me unmute Dao. Hey Dao, how are you? You're unmuted as yeah. There you go.
Here I am.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm enjoying the conversation as well, and I wanted to kind of dovetail on what Damini was saying. I actually went back. This goes back to in the election in 2016, to be honest with you, and those years that followed. Really, it was a huge trauma for me, and I had already been doing a lot of improvisational music. So I have a background both in music and visual art. And it became something during those years that I had to do every day. It's what kept me alive, I think. And some of it was expressing the emotions that I was feeling moving through the improvs. But I also, and part of it was thanks to Domini, because she invited me. She said, why don't you try doing an improv a day and posting it on Instagram? She was doing that with paintings. And that started a whole process of kind of using the socials as my canvas where I would put stuff. But it wasn't about so much final work that was very carefully brought to completion as this in the moment expressions. And part of why I wanted to do that was to show, like to model what it's like doing that. But in my case, it was with music. Mm-hmm. So and then when the pandemic hit, I was about to move across the country. My house was up for sale, and I halted that process, but I was really thrown for a loop because the move was carefully considered, and what I was going to do when I got there was all based on live events with music and people singing and things like this. And I thought, who knows when you can do that again? Mm-hmm. And it just really threw everything for a loop. And then other things started happening where I am or in this general area. And I found it difficult to also continue the daily practice of creative stuff just for me, for no other purpose, mm-hmm. Just the expression. So I would say it's suffered a little bit.
I think musicians, definitely live musicians, have suffered quite a bit, and theater people too, as their collaborative nature of their work is just sort of interrupted, because you couldn't actually be together with people in person, and improvisational music is one of those things.
Well, this one thing that was interesting though with the whole process that started even before COVID was I never was a solo artist in my life. Like for decades, I always played with other people, and I liked being in bands or in groups. And I somehow it was part of this cocooning process I was doing that was in a way isolating, but in a way it allowed a healing to happen. And in the process of doing that for months and a few years, it was really creatively transformative. Like making the commitment to do it every day and to get a post up
Mm.
for a period of time, it was every day, and then I relaxed it a little bit. But it was pretty transformative. And now I do solo things, which I never in my life did. It was transformative for my singing. So I highly recommend and this process of uh, doing this expressive thing every day. You find a way to do it where it doesn't, take over your day.
Mm.
But
Yeah, no, that sounds. Thank you so much for that share. I really appreciate it. It also brings to my mind like a sort of theme really of um, over the pandemic, learning how our artwork and ourselves relate to others and aloneness too, and how those affect those practically and emotionally. And thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And so let's finish up with some the question. We'll go back to the what was the second question in the talk, which is and we'll go to Phoebe and Lorna, which is how we can heal as a society together the trauma of the pandemic through art making. And why don't we go to Lorna and see what you have to say?
Thank you, Karin. I think that one thing I have learned during the pandemic is that the virtual world can be used to connect people in a way that I never thought was possible before. So making art with a group of people is easier to facilitate and to participate in than it was before the pandemic. Mm. And this is what we need to do. We need to come together, however far apart we are. We need to experiment with different art forms, say try new mediums, and connect with different people, surprise ourselves even, and be creative. So in a way that's a call for action. We have the means, we have the way that we can connect each other, no matter where you are in the world. And we have creativity as a source of inspiration and provision. So now we need to learn from what we have achieved during the pandemic and take it forward.
Mm. Definitely. Yeah, it is in my mind as well, a call to action, that we can't just, flip the switch and go back to what, the new normal, or, whatever, that there's a timeline really of how we're going to really heal and take time to reflect on how our lives have changed. And and we have the tools, like you said, these ways of connecting, across borders, like Derek and you were saying, and how the idea of collective art making is a lot more realistic now around the globe, which is so fantastic. Um, and God knows what we can create through that, which is wonderful. Um, So, Phoebe, you want to say something about this?
Yes. And I say what I'm going to say despite being an introvert. But I frankly think the world needs a big celebration someday after COVID-19 is conquered,
Mm.
or when we're able to live with it. And what better way to celebrate than a day of group art making throughout the world? Just as every new year is greeted with celebration and fireworks as the new year marches across the globe, just so the post COVID world could greet that day, starting in Australia and progressing around the earth. To express our grief and sorrow, yes, but also our gratitude that we got through it as a world, that we pulled together, and despite enormous losses, we made it. A day of remembering those who didn't survive, and a day of celebrating the present moment. Actors, dancers, musicians, poets, writers, artists, all art makers would have a role expressing these things. Group made banners and other works of art could be displayed in every town, a permanent memorial to this time, and as a testament to our continued survival as a world together.
Wow, I just got chills listening to that. It's wow. That would be amazing and also so profoundly meaningful and touching, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I can see it.
Yeah, and the idea of celebration and art making being so interconnected, as I think they always have been, on so many levels. But community celebration, being so connected to art making. So beautiful. Thank you so much, Phoebe. And so I think what we'll do is, we probably won't go the full hour. We'll just cut off a little sooner. But I just want to ask anybody if they have any final words they want to say. Um, just feel free to pipe up, whoever wants to. And if not, we can end it. I'll take that as no one has any final thoughts. I actually enjoy leaving it on Phoebe's final thought of a worldwide art making celebration, honoring the grief and the joy of surviving. I think that that is a beautiful way to end it. Thank you so much for everyone coming today. I thank Mad in America too for sponsoring this event. Again, this has been recorded, just so everyone knows, so that this will be up on the Mad in America's YouTube channel, so you can listen to it again if you want or whatever. And yeah, so I'll end the room unless Phoebe, you unmuted yourself. Did you want to say something?
I just want to thank you and Lorna and Derek for joining me in this.
Yeah, likewise, and thanks, Karin, for organizing. And I'll see you all at the worldwide art making celebration.
Yes, I love it. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone. Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Take care.